Oh, good evening to everybody. Whew. Lots to talk about, and of course, in the last couple hours, I started coming down with a cold. I guess I came down with a cold a day ago or so, but it's coming on strong right now, so we'll wait for everybody to roll in, and then we'll get rolling here. Got a lot to talk about, man. Chapter 5 is a good one, too, so hope you got your book, or you've been taking some practice tests for that general. In fact, why don't I, while we're waiting here, I'm going to move the microphone right like that. How's that look? That probably sounds much better. Okay. Get your radios tuned up too. I'm on 14.260. For those of you that have the HF, just make sure you're telling me in the chat, and we can try and do a little QSO. Whew. Hope everybody's ready for the weekend, getting charged up here. I hope I am not going to be sick in the weekend. It's Mother's Day weekend, man. Mother's Day weekend. Volume it down. Okay. I got like 0 gain right now on my mic, so the fact you want me to volume it down is good. So cool. Hopefully that sounds good. That sounds where it should be. Glad. Okay. All right. Here we go. What is happening, everybody? You are right on time, Hunter. You are right on time. Do I have my camera? Yeah, look at I'm reaching into the space. All right. Welcome to the Ham Radio Crash Course. I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold, but that won't stop this train from moving forward. As always, along with trains, we move forward with radio, and that's what this is about. We try and learn something new every day and put it to practice and get started on learning, because that's just how you learn, right? You just start building incremental blocks. You ask your questions on the Ham Radio Crash Course there on Facebook or to Google, and then you try and practice it. You try and work it out. So the pins on my hat, sorry about the green screen stuff, but that's my NASA, WTF NASA, and then next to that is the ARRL logo. But I kind of like it because it's green screen reactive. Some people get really mad about green screen on the live stream for some reason, but I don't know. I think it's cool. I like the ambiance of the green screen, and I'm going to keep doing it. So, hey. All right. Lots to talk about. Newsletter went out. Hopefully those patrons got it. It's $1 to get the newsletter. We're doing something a bit different for the Brew Crew this month, and I turned 36 last month. And I don't know why, I just got a weird feeling. I said, I'm going to challenge myself all of May, or as much of May as I can possibly do. No alcohol. No alcohol whatsoever in May. Maybe that's getting ready for Field Day, which we're also going to talk about. We're going to be talking about Field Day for the next couple of weeks before it happens in June. Biggest event in ham radio, Field Day. And I've got a big thing planned for that. In fact, I'm planning on streaming the whole event, meaning possibly 24/7. Or as long as I can take it before I crash. So the Brew Crew, though, I'm not abandoning the Brew Crew. It's still the Brew Crew. So what are we going to do? We're going to brew some espresso right now. All right. So I picked this thing up for SOTA, but I liked it so much, I figured I'd do a quick little thing before we get started. Plus, I need a pick-me-up big time for for whatever thing I've got going on in my head. Mini Presso, okay? Mini Presso, I got the pin off of Amazon. I believe it's on my Amazon store. Link is in the description. You can go right to it. No, I am a general. And once I get done with the general class license that we're doing now, I'm going to go probably start studying the extra. So the Mini Presso comes with all these cool little pieces. And all you do, it's pretty simple. Take your little scoop. This is like camping coffee. This is like the SOTA coffee maker for days here. So take a scoop of coffee, in my case espresso, and dump it all over the desk. That's a really good idea. Okay. Take your filter, put it on top, just like so. Flip it over, tap it. Okay. Then tamp it. Okay, you got it tamped. Then this goes on top of the machine like that. Put the lid on the top. These are not, you can do pods, but it makes a shot of espresso. And I got some boiling water that I put in my thermo flask here. but you'd boil this out on the field. I'm totally taking this for SOTA, by the way. And then you pour the line. Oh, you should get that brush out of there beforehand. Oop. Get your pliers because you don't want to reach into boiling water. Come here, little brush friend. I didn't realize you were still in there. All right, get him out of there. Go to the line. Okay. So it took a week. Just the FCC finally posted my general upgrade today. Way to go, Jason. Excellent work. All right, so we got people coming in. Yeah, make sure to hit it up in the chat here if you got your license or whatever you plan. You know, if you got your upgrade or you got your technician, post in the license, or make sure you post in the ham radio crash course. So now you take your mini presso, twist this little thing, and it pops out a plunger. And you turn it upside down, and you just start pumping once a second into your cup. Good little workout to do one-handed. I normally do it two-handed. In fact, I gotta employ the second hand here. For those of you like espresso, man, this is awesome. So there you go. Look at fresh espresso in a portable little device. You actually get the crema and the whole thing right there. This is Lavazza. Lavazza. So I can't do SOTA this weekend because it's Mother's Day, but I think I'm going to go possibly the next weekend or the weekend after that, and I'm planning on doing San Gabriel Mountain, which is a nice 4-mile out and back, 4 miles. Terrific. That's perfect. I'll be able to get that done in like no time, so I'm pretty excited about that. I'll show you my espresso right now. Cafe espresso. Okay, so look at that. That's a proper shot of espresso. And they make a double, like it's a handheld espresso machine. They make a double adapter that you can put on it. And it's not, I mean, they have pods. You can do the pod thing, but you don't have to worry about that. You can just go straight with the grounds right into it. So you take a little bit of grounds out there in the field with you. Bring your normal heat, flame, fire, whatever it is you heat water with. Boil up some water and make it happen. So I'm totally a big fan of that. So that's the brew. It's still brew, so that counts as the brew coup. At least a couple more weeks we'll be out of there, and we'll be back to the beers. I feel a little bit different not drinking. A little bit more energy, I guess. I feel like I'm not riding the highs and lows, I guess. I'd only have a couple of beers throughout the week, maybe a couple glasses of wine, but, you know, had a couple, usually the strong stuff for the crash course. So anyway. Carl asks, what equipment do you bring with you when you do the activations? I take my Zygu X5105, and by the way, you can watch the videos. I've got a ton of SOTA, or not a ton, but my SOTA activations are all online. And I take whatever antenna I'm using at the time. I've been using this QRP vertical thing. I took the MFJ Big Ears one time. That was huge. It was a really big antenna. Cheers. Okay. Ooh, that was good. Good. If you like espresso, man, it's legit. I also have this ginger beer, which is not alcoholic, but we're going to drink that too. Nice little refreshing thing to cleanse the palate. If you like ginger, man. I love ginger. Okay, so I got a couple things to talk about, and then we'll get rolling right in here. I got a QSL card. What's interesting about this QSL card is it's like the first QSL card that I've gotten since we've been doing the Ham Radio Crash Course, and it was with somebody on the Discord chat. So, Howard, your QSL card is in the mail. If I work any of you and you are doing QSL cards, I'll send you one of mine, which I will show you what it looks like. So in case you want a Hashnasi QSL card. Bladow. That's my QSL card. Okay. Also, Nifty references. So I picked these up, and this is niftyaccessories.com. It covers all the bands, information on the bands, when the different privileges begin and end, and what modes you should operate on for HF. These things are super handy, and it covers 160, 80, 60, 40, 30, 20, 17, 15, 12, all the way through all the bands. So it's a really handy chart that you can have with you just be able to flip through to make sure you're not operating inappropriately. So no link in the description yet, but it's Nifty Accessories if you want to Google that. I'll post the link after the chat. And then they have rig specific Nifty accessory books. This one I picked up for the 7300, and it includes all the handy little things you do. And I like it because it tells you why you'd want to do the thing that it says. So this says improving reception, right? DSP filters, RIT, preamp, attenuator, all those fun little things. And you can go through this whole thing, and it covers a whole lot of details. All the actual functional button tweaks that you'd want to do on your radio. It's really, really cool. So there, okay? The reason I got those is for field day. When you do field day, you've got a lot of you're trying to make as many contacts as you can, right? I'm on 20 meters right now. In fact, let me switch this over. There you go. I'm on 14.260. So when you're doing field day, you want to make as many contacts as possible. So anything that can help you not forget what's going on with your radio, or what frequencies you should avoid. If you remember all of that, great, kudos. I remember most of it. I didn't buy those because I don't remember things. I buy them so that I don't forget, and then I don't quickly have to get on the internet to figure it out. It's just right there at hand, so it makes it really easy. Cycle Camp asks, what ended up being the issue with the Zygu from your previous vid? You'd have to be more specific, because since the first time I did a video on the Zygu, I've been operating like crazy with it on SOTA activation. So that might have just been me pulling it out of the box and not knowing what I was doing at the time. I think that's probably more or less what it is, but it's a great radio. In fact, somebody contacted me that they're selling their 817, their Yaesu 817, and they bought a Zygu X5105, which I thought, that's a pretty good swap up. The only downside, as I've mentioned in my mobile review of the Zygu and other videos, is that it's only HF bands. It doesn't do 2 meter or 70 centimeter. Okay. Last shout out. What else did I get? Everything? Oh, of course. Discord chat. Zach posted the link. We do a live chat after the live stream on YouTube, where I go on Discord. So you take that link, you go download Discord, and you can talk to me directly if you want to talk or chat and want to ask me questions outside of what we do here. Because when we start doing the class stuff, it kind of goes fast and furious, and I don't answer a lot of questions. Oh, no, yeah, it's all Cycle Camp asked, no modulation or something like that. Yeah, it's all sorted out. That was purely just my configuration of it. And once I got the DSP going for it, the digital signal processing, it's great. It's really good radio. If you are going to talk to me on 14260, make sure you say something. We'll do a quick CQ. CQ, CQ, CQ for Kilo India 6, November Alpha Zulu. CQ for Kilo India 6, November Alpha Zulu. See if we get anybody back right now. Okay, we're not hearing anybody. No problem. Okay, so today we're talking about Chapter 5, which is Radio Signals and Equipment from the ARRL General Guidebook. This is probably one of the better chapters in the book because it actually goes a step further than the Technician License book does in regards to how a radio actually works. So looking forward to this one. The notes here is really awesome. Also, without even buying the book, shout out to ARRL.org/general-class-license-manual. Free material for you guys to look at. So, okay. And I'll just read this verbatim because it covers just basically what I said. Even though you studied the following terms and concept for your technician license, it helps to start by reviewing the basics. A radio signal at one frequency whose strength never changes is called continuous wave, CW. Frequency doesn't change. It's always full output. There's no modulation of the waves, either adjustments in frequency or power, amplitude or frequency. Okay. Adding information to a signal by modifying in subways such as changing its frequency, phase, angle, or amplitude is called modulation. The method of modulation that carries the information to the signal is mode. The simplest mode is continuous wave turned on and off in a coded pattern such as Morse code. Right? Makes sense. Hopefully everybody, is following this, even if you don't have your technician yet, it makes sense because we kind of covered all this data on the technician class license videos. Okay, so I'm going to take this keyboard and just move it out of the way because we're going to be exploring all the space here. So the first thing to talk about is amplitude modulated modes. The most prominent one is AM, amplitude modulation, right? The information, okay, so amplitude modulation is where you add speech and data via changing its power output. Ooh, sorry about that. Oh, see, this is, I'm going to knock the book already. See, it's cutting a question in half, so you got to make sure you go back and go, okay, the information is contained in the signal's envelope, dash, the maximum values of instantaneous power for each cycle. The process of recovering speech or music by following the envelope of an AM signal is called detection. Right? Jason says, I highly recommend Gordo's book for the questions, ARRL book for the background details of the topics. Yeah, so the ARRL book is good for reading kind of the details and giving you a good enough understanding of the material. And then you just go take the practice questions. That's what I recommend, is get the ARRL book. You can get Gordo's book for the questions, but just go download the app and use that. Yeah, why not, right? Because it's just one less thing you have to worry about. And you can always have the app on you, and then you can be taking practice tests as you go through your day, right? Okay, an AM signal is composed of carrier and two sidebands, okay? So it's literally like a big carrier wave and then two side lobes, right? And that's kind of what the upper band and the lower sideband. So upper sideband and lower sideband, you're going to hear this term later because of single sideband, where we have just the carrier and one of the sidebands. Okay, an AM signal modulated by tone has two sidebands. As we mentioned, the upper sideband is the higher in frequency in the carrier, and by frequency of the tone, the lower sideband is lower in frequencies than the carrier. Makes sense. They go right there in the top. And this is kind of what it looks like. Okay? You've got your carrier and then your two sidebands. Now, you've got amplitude modulation, right? And let's make sure we've covered that completely. AM signal with carrier and one sideband removed is called single sideband. We said that. Single sideband has a smaller bandwidth and also makes it possible to fit more signals in a fixed range. The wider AM signals tend to have a fuller frequency response that sounds warmer on the air. Now, we may be able to do this later because there's usually a couple of AM nets, and there's always somebody on single sideband on one of the nets. In fact, we should probably, you know what, let's just do that now. I tried to buy a third camera so that I can have one facing at the radio at all times, so I can actually show you. That did not come in the Amazon fast enough. So if the doorbell rings, I may run and get a new camera and plug it in really quickly. But we can hear it, and that's what's important. So let's see if we can find. Not a lot. I'm gonna switch to 40. That looks like AM. Maybe it's not. That's sideband. That's interference. All right. Well, did a good college try on that one. It's actually pretty noisy out there. Ooh, that's FT8. I went too far. Anyway. Ooh, don't want to leave there. So that's sideband. That's a killer signal on sideband. That guy's S9, meaning that's perfect. Not AM, though. I'll keep an eye out. If I hear AM, I'll pause. Carl! All right, if you got to take off, buddy, I understand. Take it easy. Carrie, you're not that late. Don't worry. We just barely got started, and we were talking about AM, which is the simplest kind of mode to understand. Angled modes, right? So angled modes is frequency modulation, or FM. The amount that the FM's frequency varies when modulated is called deviation. Phase modulation is created by varying the signal's phase angle. Receivers, right? So the front end, as we call it, of the radio, plus more. Receivers can demodulate FM and PM with the same demodulating circuits. That's a question. That's two questions from the question pool, so remember that. FM and PM are called angle modulation because both techniques modulate the signal by varying the signal's phase angle. Sorry, it's my voice is all blah, 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 blah. In fact, can we lower this a little bit? There we go. All right. So bandwidth definition. We talked about bandwidth a lot, but we'll just go with what the textbook says. Plus, we've got a lot of things I highlighted here. So composite signals are groups of individual signals that combine or create a complex signal. Composite signals have components that may cover a range of frequencies. The difference in frequency between the lowest and highest component of the composite signal is the signal's bandwidth, right? CW has a very small bandwidth because it's just full on or off, full on, off, full on or off. And it's the duration of the on and off that gives you the dits and daws. Okay? The FCC has a very kind of interesting definition for it, and I'll just quote theirs verbatim. Bandwidth, the width of a frequency band outside of which the mean power of the transmitted signal is attenuated to at least 26 dB below the mean power within the band. Everybody's got that, right? That makes perfect sense. The FCC limits signal bandwidth so that many stations and types of signals can be shared the limited amounts of spectrum space. $5 from Raymond. Thank you. My light just awoke me to that chat. Thank you very much, Raymond. I appreciate it. If you have a question, post it below, and I'll try to get to it. Make sure if you're going to do the super chat that you post a question or something. I will pause and I'll answer it, because that's kind of what it's for. It's what gets me out of my brain, out of the reading the book. Okay, list the bandwidth, the most common interstitials. Okay, so here let's walk through this again. I think we've talked about this a little bit, but it's also good to remember. AM voice is 6 kilohertz. Amateur television, 6 megahertz. Single sideband is 2 to 3 kilohertz, basically half, right? Digital single sideband can be 50 to 3,000 hertz. CW is 10 to 300 hertz. And then FM voice is 5 to 6 kilohertz. We've talked about this table before, but just remember CW is very small bandwidth. A lot of digital modes are very low bandwidth, and then they can get really big bandwidth, like Hellscriber and RTTY is pretty big. And then you start getting bigger from there. Single sideband, and then AM, and then FM. FM's real big. Okay? Now, the bandwidth thing, isn't there a better description of bandwidth? I think they talk about it later in more detail. But bandwidth is basically how you fit that data, whatever it is, and you kind of like, based off of how you're fitting the data in, whether it's amplitude or phase modulation or frequency modulation, that space that you take up in that frequency band, is you try to reduce it to the smallest amount that your communication is practical. That's basically the rule on bandwidth. And so when you see single sideband and FM and AM, they all generally work around the same regardless of which mode you're in. You can modify it with some radios, but most of the time you just set the mode and leave it alone. Okay, so oscillators are pretty much the core of radio. It's one of the major building blocks of radio, and that's actually what we're going into, the radio building blocks. The function of most oscillators used in radios is to produce a pure sine wave with no noise or distortion. And this is basically what an oscillator looks like. You have an amplifier, and then you have your feedback, and it's just a loop that starts to basically reflect back on itself, right? Raymond Sparks said, he asked a question. A week ago, I had no plans of getting into ham. Since then, Hashnasi has completely demystified it for me. Also, the BFF8 full of local frequencies and taking my technician test tomorrow. Zach asked him, have you been passing the practice? And he says, consistently above 90. Yeah, you're good, man. Go take the test. Again, I'll repeat. Regardless of whether you're taking technician class or general class, if you're making it over 75%, just go take the test. Go take the test and get it out of the way. Start having some fun. You're not going to remember all this stuff. You're not going to remember all this stuff until you put it into practice. So until you put it into practice, there's really no point in worrying about the other stuff. Just go take the test, get out. The most important thing you're going to get out of the test is don't hurt yourself, don't hurt others, and try not to create interference. Right? If you can avoid all those things and not be a jerk, then you're just going to learn as you go, right? Yeah. Anyway, okay. An oscillator consists of an amplifier, right? That's the triangle. So that's going to come up later. That may come up in other questions in the test, right? That increases signal amplitude, gain, and a feedback circuit to route some of the amplifier's output signal back into the input. If at any frequency the product of the amplifier's gain and the amount of the feedback is greater, than unity, the circuit's output will be self-sustaining, called oscillation. Right? So you're taking your amplifier and it's feeding a little bit back through a feedback loop, and then that's creating your oscillation. That is a very high-level explanation of that, and that's all you need to know. Oh yeah, Carrie. This is the first time I got to say this in a chat. Carrie has been accepted to go to the ARRL HQ for a teacher summit that they're putting together. So big congratulations to Carrie. That's awesome. I hope you take copious notes or get some kind of slides or something like that that you can maybe pass on some of the information. That would be useful for us. Some of us people out here that would be interested in that, maybe. Okay, the feedback circuit must include a filter, right? Because that's usually what squares are, is filters. So the feedback is present at only the intended frequency, okay? That's going to become really important later when we talk about oscillating on particular frequencies. And there's different ways of doing that. There's multiple types of oscillators. In fact, I should have pulled this out before I started the chat. Hold on. Let me do that now. Don't mind me. I just forgot to do something important. Sorry about that. Did I really? Oh, there it is. All right, no problem. We're good. We're good. So we're going to talk about types of oscillators right now, but we'll just cover one right now. That right here, where my right hand is a crystal oscillator. And it's cut to oscillate on 7.023 megahertz. Okay, that's 40 meters. That's the 40 meter CW QRP range. This is a Pixie QRP radio. I think I've got a way to get a bunch of these for relatively cheaply, so I think I'm going to get some, and I may just give them out to people for future things. This is not a QRP radio that you're going to go do SOTA activations, by the way, before anybody asks. Maybe you could if you're really good in CW and you had an amazing, perfectly set up antenna to do it, and you were really lucky. But that puts out a tiny amount of power. So maybe start somewhere else, then don't worry about the Pixies, okay? I know that question's coming up, so I figured I'd just get on front of it right now. An oscillator's output frequency can be fixed or variable. The crystal I just showed you is locked. It's a locked frequency. There are three types of oscillators: RC, LC, and crystal. I just showed you the crystal. An RC's oscillator feedback circuit is made up of resistors and capacitors because the combination of reactance, resistance, okay, we talked about that. When applied to an amplifier input, reinforces the output signal, building up a steady output signal. Okay. The LC oscillator's feedback circuit consists of an inductor, an L, and a capacitor, a C, connected in parallel or series to form a resonant circuit, often called a tank circuit, because it stores electricity energy like a flywheel stores mechanical energy. I'm going to leave that alone because those are just things you have to remember. Just basically understand an oscillator can be either cut crystal, like the one I showed you, that's just cut for that frequency and that's all it's good for, or it can be an RC or an LC, which is adjustable. That will possibly come up in questions. Okay. LC oscillators are more stable than RC oscillators and can be used throughout the radio frequency spectrum. A quartz crystal is often substituted for the LC tank crystal. Okay, remember that. That is also a question later. Okay, now the variable frequency oscillator, whose output frequency can be adjusted, is used to tune the radio to different frequencies. don't have a radio at my disposal that I can put a camera on. Basically, your knob that's used to adjust the frequency, that's your VFO. Your big, chunky knob that all the HF radios have, that's your VFO, your variable frequency oscillator, okay? That is possibly one of the most easily found and easily understood pieces of hardware on a radio. So just note where your VFO knob is. It's usually the biggest thing. It's usually pretty chunky, heavy, and has a really good feel to it. It's kind of like when you have a car's your steering wheel, and how you feel in tune with the road kind of thing. That's your VFO knob. The frequency oscillator is adjusted by varying the value of one or more components in the feedback circuit. Remember, feedback circuit. So you adjust something here, and then that changes the frequency that you're going out on. Makes sense? Hopefully it makes sense. We can explain more. Okay, so you need an oscillator for that sine wave, and that sine wave is oscillating on a given frequency. Now, does it cover the RF output? Mixer? Local? Okay, so here's your oscillator, which is giving you that sine wave on a given frequency, and it goes into a mixer. A key function in both receivers and transmitters is the ability to change the frequency of a signal, as you will see in the following sections. The circuit that performs that job is the mixer. The block diagram, okay? A mixer circuit combines two input frequencies and produces their sum and difference at its output. This process is called heterodyning. So we'll talk about super heterodyning if we get to that. It's later in the chapter. But we're already 30 minutes in. So we'll see how far we get today. For example, 14.050 megahertz and F2 being 3.35 megahertz, the output of the mixer will contain signals at 10.7 megahertz. Okay? It's up to the following circuits to select the desired signal from the pair and make use of it. A mixer can change a signal to any other frequency. The input and output frequencies do not have to be related in any way. Okay? So a mixer is what allows you to change the output. So you have an input coming in, you modify it, and you get a different frequency on the output. By the way, this is a fever tree. That's funny because I'm getting a fever. I'm getting a fever. Naturally light ginger beer. This would be good with some vodka. Anyway, okay. And now multiplier, another piece that goes into your radio, whether it's a receiver or transmitter, it covers all these items here. A circuit that acts similarly to a mixer is a multiplier. Instead of creating the sum and difference of the two frequencies, a multiplier creates a harmonic of an input frequency. So that's a question. Remember that. The block diagram symbol for a multiplier is shown on 5.4. This is a multiplier. Okay. Multipliers are often used when a stable VHF and UHF signal is required, but constructing an oscillator at that frequency would be difficult. Okay. Modulators are circuits which perform a neat trick of adding information to a carrier signal, either as amplitude, frequency, or phase variations. So, all right. So now we're starting to put things together. You had a sine wave in the oscillator, a continuous sine wave on a given frequency. And then you have a mixer which can adjust frequencies that you are outputting on. And now you're going to modulate that sine wave at particular moments in time, or via power, or actually both. That's where you insert the data. The data could be voice into a microphone, right? I'm modulating, right, this microphone via my voice, via a diaphragm that has it has a circuit that's basically reacting to my voice, pushing up against it and causing its own waves, right? The frequency of those waves will vary. That gets pushed into a modulator. You're modulating the audio, or sorry, the RF that gets shoved out. Okay? Does a antenna tuner use a vibe? Is that what you wanted to ask? A vibe? An antenna tuner, which we talked about a little bit, a variable oscillator? No. It uses a circuit. It uses an LC circuit. There are different types of tuners. I'm green screening myself a little bit. There we go. But no, you don't need a variable oscillator for a tuner, right? I'm pretty sure that's true. Okay. Modulators. You may have noticed that all four of the oh, this is an interesting point. So this is also important to understand. Which we may talk about in the future, unrelated to the ham radio crash, or unrelated to the general license, how to read schematics if you're going to do a kit. Things kind of go from power to ground, top and bottom, and then from left to right, depending on the flow. So you may have noticed that all four of the block diagram symbols support the left to right signal flow. That is recommended for schematics and block diagrams. You don't have to, but it's kind of a standard. Okay. Amplitude modulators. So we just talked about oscillators. Now we're going to modulate that with a modulator. AM was the first generated by varying the power supply voltage to the output circuit of a CW transmitter. So we took a CW transmitter and we modulated the output, thus giving you amplitude modulation. We adjusted the power, and we're following that change in power as it dips and dives. That's called detection, which we covered earlier, and that allows you to pull the data out, your receiver to pull the data out through demodulation. Okay. I'm trying to answer questions too as they come in, but I think we're good. You can easily imagine the process. Okay, as the voltage is varied, the amplitude of the output signal's envelope follows along. This is called plate or collector or drain modulation because the voltage that is varied is connected to a vacuum tube. That is not a helpful diagram. The spectrum of 3 types of AM signals. AM has 2 sidebands. Okay. How close is too close? We don't need to cover that. Okay. Frequency modulation is the result when the frequency of the modulated signal deviates only in proportion to the modulating signal's amplitude. Okay? Not power-based. It's frequency adjusted. Phase modulation occurs if the deviation is proportional to both the modulating signal's amplitude and frequency. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. Pretty straightforward, hopefully. When modulation is applied, the phase of a carrier will be changed, but the average frequency will not be changed. And reactance modulators can be used to create frequency modulation. There's an amp, reactance modulator, oscillator, frequency modulated output, fixed frequency, oscillator, amp, reactance modulator, phase modulation. Okay, so do you see? There we go. So depending on where your modulator and your amp is between the oscillator is where you're going to get FM, frequency modulation, or phase modulated. And there are questions associated with that that are going to be covered in the practice tests, not necessarily covered in the writing verbatim. The ARRL book covers the details, and they cover some of the questions because it helps to give you the background of said details, but not needed specifically if you're going to learn specifics of whatever questions. So make sure that you go also, of course, look at the questions, which we will do practice exams probably as its own. You might even do just a practice night where we just do practice tests, which could kind of be fun. Okay, transmitter structure. So they're going to cover it later, but transmitters are less complicated than receivers, and complication is probably the wrong word. There's more going on with the receiver because that's what's doing the most important job, is receiving the signals that you want to respond to. Transmitters are important, but you absolutely need to receive, and they're going to spend a lot of time on receivers because there's so many more things you can do with filtering and DSP and now SDRs and all that stuff. David asked, how do I go from coax to a balance feed line? Do I need to make some sort of choke? Read about balance, but don't quite understand them. Okay, so a balance feed line, and I can talk a little bit about this because I'm dealing with this myself. A balance feed line is used for something like a G5RV or a doublet antenna. Balance feed line is called window line, or 2 vertical metal lines that are separated by some kind of insulating strip or whatnot. They are open and reacting to each other, so they're a part of the antenna. They're an active part of the antenna. So if, in my case, that feed line gets too close to a metal mast, which how else do you get an antenna up if you're not going to use a metal mast or have something that's like really robust but not metal? You need to have standoffs or pull it away from the metal, that kind of stuff. Now, a balun is short form for saying balanced, unbalanced, balanced, unbalanced. Ladder line, ooh, sorry, my hand is green screening out. I just noticed that. Sorry about that. Balanced is a ladder line. Twin lead, balanced feed line, right? A coax is unbalanced because the shielding is wrapped around the center post, and so you've taken the balanced line that were right next to each other and you've enveloped one within the other. You don't short it out, but you've enveloped it. So what you can do is you can use a 1-to-1 balun to go from the two legs of the feed line into the coax, or you can use a 4-to-1 balun to handle the step up, because the feed line and the balanced line, I believe, is 70 or 75 ohms, and coax is supposed to be 50 ohms. So you're using the balun to kind of step on the feed line to get it to better match the coax. That is my understanding. And there are different kinds of there's different kinds of baluns. Like right now I'm using a 4-to-1 balun on my G5RV, which before anybody says anything, I know that that's not required, but that is what was recommended by the manufacturer, so that's what I'm doing. There is also a 9-to-1 balun that is often used for end-fed antennas, like a random wire end-fed antenna. They use a 9-to-1 balun, which is basically what that's doing is it's using the coax as the counterpoise of the antenna. So can be interesting when you start pushing some high power through an end-fed through a 9-to-1. But if you're doing proper station stuff, shouldn't be a problem. So yes, James, ladder line. A balanced line is ladder line. The KG6 HQD dipole is ladder line. Twin feed, twin lead. The zip line, right? The lamp cord power cable that's separated by a piece of plastic, that's a balanced line, right? Because one is not enveloping the other as a ground or a counterpoise. So that you can run to a balun, or you run to the post connector. So one leg of the balance line goes here, and one leg of the balance line goes there. And that goes into your radio, and then you have to tune it. Because most of the time you have to tune antennas that are based off a balance line, because they're possibly going to be more resonant. They're probably going to be more resonant on other frequencies depending on how they're built. So like if they're doublet or whatnot. Okay, AM modes. The simplest, it consists of only an oscillator and an amplifier. Okay, cool. This is where we start like, what's a radio? What's actually a radio? So the simplest transmitter consists of an oscillator and an amplifier and a means of turning the output signal on and off. Literally a straight key. You take an oscillator, cut for a given frequency, going back to our Pixie here that has a 40-meter crystal in it. You hook a key to it, which is this post. You hook a key, and all a key is, a straight key, which I think this might be able to reach. All a straight key is, oh, there goes all my Mother's Day cards. Let me unplug it. All a straight key is a switch. It's just, oh, the legs came off. That's not very good. It's just a switch that turns on and off or closes the transmitter loop. Right? So you're just closing the gap there. And that's what's activating the transmitter and transmitting RF. And since your frequency is set, your oscillator's frequency is set, you're now transmitting on that frequency in the simplest sense of the word. So it's actually not that difficult to build a transmitter. Hence my cool little QRP keychain, right? This is a simple little transmitter that probably just has an oscillator, which we know it does because it's cut for 14.1475 megahertz, and it's got a switch that delivers the power through the oscillator into the amplifier and out the SMA jack. Well, dang, that's an easy way of explaining a simple transmitter right there. QRP, the QRP keychain, which is Quirky QRP, I believe. Quirky QRP keychain on Twitter. Thanks again for sending me that. I love that little thing. I think I would get arrested if I took that to work, but why can't you transmit CW with less than 500 hertz? I don't know. Not enough to power the components? Maybe. Oh, I freaked out, Zach. I was like, this is not going to be the best video for you. Should I? What? What did I do? Okay, Blake Austin. You're going to have to walk me through that more. Why can't you transmit CW with less than 500 hertz? Is that like a joke? I don't know. You might have to tell me. Is it because it can't power the components? You can't create an oscillation? Don't know. Okay. By changing the frequency. Okay, so now we're going to introduce. So we had an oscillator. Now we have a mixer, right? And what does a mixer do? It takes in multiple frequencies and it can change the output. So if you have a cut crystal into a mixer, and here's a local oscillator or some kind of VFO or switch, whatever, you run that through a mixer and a filter, your key then gets depressed, and now you've changed the frequency output. So that's when you introduce a VFO. Okay? So if the crystal oscillator is replaced with a variable frequency oscillator, it becomes a VFO-controlled transmitter. Here's a comment about crystals, but we covered it already. Using a crystal restricts the transmitter to one frequency per crystal, but the output frequency is quite stable. So that's true. Crystal oscillators are very solid. They work really well. They're very inexpensive, and they're easy to make. Hey, what's up, Biker Bob? Good to see you. They're easy to make transmitters out of. So that's why a lot of the cheap ones, which Pixies, I think, are $7 on eBay or something like that. Maybe they're up to 12 now. I don't know. But, yeah, really easy. And that's a fun kit to build, guys. That's a fun kit, this one. There's a couple of capacitors that you got to be cogent of the positive, and a couple of diodes. I think that one diode right there, you got to be cogent of that. And in fact, that one is soldered in technically backwards, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyway, it's a fun little kit. Okay. This is kind of a little advanced. This is more towards the operation of the radio, not so much how radios function. But anyway. The use of microprocessor-controlled dual VFOs in modern transceivers makes it easy to use the time-honored technique of operating split. Now, this is really HF-focused. I guess you could use this on VH. Oh, no, yeah, we totally do, because we do repeaters, kind of. Anyway, repeaters work on a similar principle. That is, listening on one frequency and transmitting on another. This is often encountered when a rare DX station is on the air with many callers. Operating simplex, transmitting and receiving on the same frequency can result in a lot of confusion with stations trying to hear the DX station while others transmit on the same frequency. So pile-ups, right? Pile-ups, everybody's simplex, and they're just like slamming on each other. I want to talk to Canary Islands. I want to talk to Easter Island. I want to talk to wherever. Case in point, I was listening to a DX that I believe they were trying to do on 40 to Italy. And they were having a tough time with it because band conditions were worse than they are tonight, and they're still just fair tonight. So respect to that for trying to make that happen. By transmitting on one frequency and having callers transmit on adjacent frequencies, everyone can hear the DX station and keep in sync. So all not the jammers, the log jammers and the pile-ups, they're transmitting on another frequency, and everybody's listening to the DX station on one specific frequency, so nobody gets confused, which... At least that's the idea. At least that's the idea. All right. As single sideband phone transmitters. So we've covered AM, kind of. We've covered a CW transmitter. Now they're going to talk about single sideband phone. So in figure 510, which is the previous one? Yeah. A balanced modulator stage is added between the oscillator and a mixer. Okay, good. Voice signals from a microphone are processed by a speech amplifier and input to the balanced modulator. Okay, good. The variable frequency carrier oscillator is the other input to the balanced modulator. The output is a DSB signal, so a filter is required to move the undesired sideband. So what does that look like? Okay, substituting the circuits to create a single sideband signal for the VFO creates a multi-band single sideband transmitter. Okay, so everything up into this point is pretty much like an AM transmitter, kind of. And then you add another filter here to remove one of the sidebands. Okay, that's basically how it works functionality-wise. Oh yeah, my SOTA does look all weird. Ooh. I also like the BFF8HP Steve. Okay. What did they just happen here? Oh, they made a jump to bandwidth. Oh, this is important. Okay. Let's go back far enough. Note that the output amplifier is now labeled a linear amplifier. This guy. Okay. Because the transmitter must accurately reproduce the rapidly changing speech waveform. In a CW transmitter, it is only necessary to turn a sine wave off and on. In an AM or single sideband transmitter, however, all the stages must be designated to accurately reproduce the input signal. So you can't just have an amplifier that's 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. It's got to vary. It has to vary with the information that's been put out on it. Otherwise, you'll just get you'll just get really bad distortion. Or not distortion, you'll get an oscillation and there'll be no data behind it. It'll just be 100% or some variance of 100%, whatever's capable. Okay. Overall, whether they amplify, mix, or filter it, distortion anywhere in the transmit chain, meaning the sequence of circuits that produce the transmitted signal, will generate unwanted, spurious signals such as harmonics, mixing products, and splatter. So we've now introduced all these complex components to this transmitter that started out just being an oscillator and an amp. Now it's a linear amp. And we've added a modulator, a mic. So the mic is introducing amplified data into the modulator, which is adding that to the oscillated frequency, whatever that may be. That's getting filtered. Then you have a mixer, which is taking the VFO frequency, creating an output, and then that output is filtered again to strip off one of the sidebands. Then that's sent through an amplifier. Any issues in tuning or anything, anywhere across the chain, will create distortion. Okay? And that it shows up as harmonics, mixing products, and splatter. Franklin Lewis asks, so I've heard people saying the bands are at the worst point in the 11-year cycle. I still can pick up and talk a long way, but I can't imagine what the bands are like at the peak of the cycle. The bands are way open when we're on the opposite side of the cycle. And that allows us to talk to extremely far off stations with very, very little issue. Very little issue, right? Take it easy, Hunter. Everybody says bye to Hunter. Take it easy. Okay. Now, this kind of gets thrown in, but it deserves mentioning it again because it's important. The FCC does not specify bandwidth limits on any phone signal except to say that signals should not occupy more bandwidth than is dictated by good amateur practice. So that's like as wide as like football uprights, right? It's like giving you all kinds of space that you can explore, but you shouldn't explore to the point that you're kind of stepping on other people. So you can have phone bandwidth that's pretty wide, but it shouldn't go beyond what you really need. Just like power output. If you don't need a lot of power to make your contact, then don't use that power, right? Okay. FM transmitters. So we needed the linear amp because we were changing power output. But that's not how FM transmitters work. They use frequency modulation. So we just go back to a standard amplifier, right? So now we take speech, we have a reactance modulator into an oscillator. So there's your sine wave, whatever it's cut to. That's multiplied, filtered, and then output on the amplifier. Modulation and frequency changes are performed differently in FM transmitters. While it is possible to generate an FM signal and then use mixers, it's much less expensive and more practical to generate the FM signal at a low frequency and multiply it to reach the desired band. this technique is introduced where we just covered in this diagram. In a 2-meter band FM transmitter, a modulated oscillating frequency is approximately 12 megahertz on the multiplier selects. And the multiplier selects the 12th harmonic for transmission. They don't explain harmonics, and it doesn't really come up a lot in the book, so don't worry about it right now. If you want to know more, we can talk about it later, or we can Google it and do that on a questions night or something like that. So write that down. In fact, I will make a note of that. We should cover that. They only cover it from like a really basic... they say, well, there's no first harmonic. Okay, that's not helpful. Anyway. For example, the output, yeah, we get the idea. Okay, here's a question. For example, if the same, well, this is 2 meters just by knowing 146, right? 146 is in the 2-meter band. 146.52 megahertz signal is to have no more than the standard deviation of 5 kilohertz. The maximum deviation of the oscillator can only be 5 divided by 12 equals 416.7 hertz. That's just a math problem. That math problem is going to be the same no matter what you do. So you can try and remember it. A lot of the math problems are... So a lot of the math problems are memorization, to be honest, because unless you're really good with math, which I'm not, I don't remember most of the equations. If you do remember some of them, that's great. Remembering Ohm's law, the circle, right? The circle with the 3 pieces is usually a pretty good one to remember and gets you through a lot of what you need. Wow. Wow. Watch out. Okay. While there may be a lot of sidebands, except for those close to the carrier, they have negligible power. Carson's rule is a formula that gives a good approximation of an FM signal's bandwidth. BW equals 2x peak deviation plus highest modulation frequency. And that's not a... Oh, no, there it is. So there's a question on this. For example, in an FM phone signal, peak deviation is limited to 5 kilohertz, and the highest modulation frequency, so it's modulating the frequency, right, is 3 kilohertz. Then bandwidth is equal to 2 times 5 plus 3, which is 16 kilohertz. That's pretty easy to remember. This signal shall stay within 20 kilohertz channels used by repeater coordinators. Thus, it is important to control. Okay, we don't need to cover all that. Okay. The only important characteristics of the FM signal is frequency. Amplifiers in an FM transmitter can be highly nonlinear as long as harmonics are removed from the transmitted signal. So we covered that. We don't need a linear amp. We just need a regular amp. Okay. Sorry, QSL card. Get you out of the way. Operating a transmitter so that the on-the-air signal is intelligible does not have to... Oh, so we're going into signal quality. All right, so we've covered all these components. I kind of mentioned that like any off-spec or off-tune component will lead to bad signal, all kinds of introduced artifacts. Oh yeah, Ethan, good morning. What time is it in Madagascar, buddy? All right, so how do we deal with signal quality? This is a good practical discussion in radio. So harmonics and parasitics are examples of spurious emissions. So what is everybody's favorite thing to say about the Baofeng? Tons of spurious emissions are generated by nearly all circuits because of minor non-linearities in their operation. Transmitters use filters to remove harmonics from their output signals. Nevertheless, you should be aware that a misadjusted or overdriven transmitter or defective equipment external to the transmitter can produce harmonics. So, everybody complains about spurious emissions on the Baofeng. A lot of that would be knocked down if they spent more money on filtering, and they don't because the radio's super cheap. So that's part and parcel why people have an argument to crap on the Baofengs. In reality, it's not that big a deal. Wow, 6 a.m. 6 a.m. So that's a full... Wow, okay. That's pretty early. Okay, so parasitics, spurs as they're called, are unwanted outputs that are not harmonically related to the desired output. They may even be low-level replicas of the desired output signal. They are usually caused by excessive drive levels or mistuning the output stage of a transmitter's amplifier. So With FM, VHF, UHF, a lot of this stuff is kind of all just closed in your little handy talkie and you don't really worry about it. When you start to get into HF, particularly kit building, you're going to spend more time tweaking stuff. Case in point, that's either... This one doesn't have any variable oscillators. This is locked. So another reason why a crystal's good too, because you don't have to mess with this. But there's some capacitors that have to be adjusted, trim pots, etc. that you tune those. You have to make those set for the appropriate frequency you want them to work on, or just receive. Okay. Overmodulation in AM modes. If the amplitude, or AM, or single sideband signal is varied excessively in response to the modulating signal, this is overmodulation. Overmodulation is caused by speaking too loudly or by setting the microphone or audio gain too high. So just like when I started out and somebody said, hey, you lower the volume a little bit, that was because I was maxing out the volume on the receive side of the microphone. So I'm transmitting, right, over the internet, but that microphone is still getting maxed out. I was redlining it. And that's a form of, overmodulation, which is mic gain being too high, and you call flat spotting. So if it's all supposed to look like a nice little wave, whether the wave is really close together or really wide, flat spotting it means you blacked it out. You went over the top. You redlined it, to use a car term. Where's this question? The figure shows the modulation envelope of an AM signal, the waveform created by connecting the peaks of the modulated signal. Figure shows an example of cutoff in which the transmitter output is turned off instead of following the modulation signal. Okay, I don't really care about that. If you have a monitoring... Okay, so this is where we're going to talk about oscillators, monitoring oscillators. If you have a monitoring oscillator in your shack, you can watch the transmitter output on voice peaks to see if your signal appears clean. So that's why people sometimes have oscilloscopes in their ham radio shack. It's for watching their transmission to make sure that it looks the way it should, right? So that's important to remember. That's a part of the test equipment. That's a part of what you might potentially want or will end up getting with an HF station. Some of the newer ones, newer radios, you worry less about that, but there's still things you can do wrongly that would yield a signal that is not what you want. So if you get your hands on an oscilloscope, particularly a digital one, for relatively inexpensively, and it works well, that's a pretty good deal. So keep an eye out for those. If the drive level to transmitter output stages or external amplifier is increased beyond the maximum output level, the result is flat topping. Or, again, it walks over the top, clipping, and then a question. See? I hate that. So it gives you this nice little quote. Hey, if you are driving the output stages beyond the point of maximum output level, the result is... clipping! Ping! And that's a question. Don't do that. Don't do that, book. The peaks of transmitted appear to be flattened. So literally it's like a peak and then flat and then the downward leg. Okay. Audio level adjustment is somewhat different for each radio and the style of signal monitoring equipment. The basics are similar. However, first use normal speech or audio levels during both testing and on-air contact. So yelling into the microphone because you really, really, really want to make a contact is usually a really good way to screw up making a contact. So keep that in mind. I do a triple shot of some good 18-year-old. Right on, James. James says, if I didn't have to take so many meds before bed, I'd do a triple shot of some good 18-year-old single malt scotch. I would like some of that, too, at this point. Because this whole whatever's going on in my head, I could just use that to knock out after we're done here. Next, make sure the monitor function to listen to your own signal while you transmit. So, KG6HQD's KX2, he has the monitor always on so that he can record not only the receive side, but also what he's transmitting into his digital recorder. And that also helps him get a good idea if he's coming out cleanly or not. He's not talking too loudly. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. In general, a microphone gain should be adjusted to cause the... Okay, so go back a step. The automatic level control, ALC, which most radios have, most base stations have. Circuits of your transmitter also help prevent overmodulation. ALC reduces output power during voice peaks. Your radio manual will have some instructions on how to use ALC properly, set transmit levels, don't worry about that. In general, the microphone gain should be adjusted to cause the ALC to activate only on voice peaks. So you don't want flat spotting, and you're overdriving the mic, and the ALC kicks in to drop the power down, or the gain down. Makes sense. Keeps your transmit audio sounding good. Patrick says, I have some 30-ish-year-old Gibson's Canadian whiskey that I should open and drink. Well, so the question is it 30-year-old in the barrels, or is it been in a bottle for 30 years? Because if it's been in a bottle for 30 years, that's not doing anything. Just drink that thing. But if it's been sitting in a barrel for 30 years, that's something special. This needs only to be performed occasionally. Oh, this is... Yeah, okay. The transmitter and any external amplifiers are then adjusted for output free of distortion. All this is saying is you got to tune this stuff occasionally. The test, this test needs to only be performed occasionally to note appropriate settings and gain level adjustments. So you're going to have to check your stuff occasionally. Makes sense, right? Speech processing, where are we now? Compared to modes such as CW, the average power of an AM or single sideband signal is quite low, because human speech fluctuates. So CW's 100% on or off, 100% on or off. Voice doesn't work that way. And it also requires a lot of bandwidth. That's why voice can be more difficult to go long distance with. That's why CW is so good. One of the reasons. When transmitted over HF, an amplitude modulated signal in the presence of noise, interference, or fading, the received signal can be difficult to understand. Speech processing addresses this problem by increasing the average power of the speech signal without excessively distorting the signal. The result is improved intelligibility of the received signal in poor condition. So there is circuitry, and there are SWR and DSP processing, speech processes that can happen to boost input of incoming speech to make it more intelligible, which some radios have. A lot of the more expensive ones do. Speech processors are available that work on the audio input to the transmitter and on the low-level RF signal before amplification. So what a lot of radios have, including my Zygu and the X5 or the X2, the KX2, KX3, and of course the 7300, is compression. So a common technique for speech processing is compression, which increases gain at low input levels while holding gain constant at louder speech components. So it kind of just brings all the differences in fluctuating frequencies, and it brings them together somewhat. Amplifies the lower points and keeps the higher points the same so that you don't lose the data there or flat top it. Just turned in a few. Bottle. It was 18-year-old when I bought it about 20 years or so ago. Yeah. So it's been 18-year-old Scotch for as long as you've had it. You might as well chow down on that bad boy. 18 years is good stuff too. Because 30-year Scotch that's been aged for 30 years in barrels is ridiculously expensive. Any kind of speech processing is by definition distortion. Too much processing, called overprocessing, results in a signal with plenty of power, but is more distorted and harder to understand than an unprocessed signal. So it's a balancing act. When you start to work with a receiver, an HF receiver, you're going to find balances of filters to use, when to use them, when not to use them, when to compress, when not to compress. That's on transmit. But there's all kinds of different things that you'll figure out as you start to use the radio. And you will figure it out, because otherwise you won't be able to hear the incoming signals. Or you'll hear them, you gotta either get rid of the noise, drop the noise down, or you've got some kind of interference that you've got to blank out, which that's a noise blanker. We'll talk about that in the future, in a little bit here too. The proper use of speech processing balances the increase in average power against any reduction in intelligibility. Cool. All right. FM signals can be overmodulated as well, but instead of distorting the signal envelope, the result is excessive deviation. This increases the strength of the extra FM signal sidebands that are usually too small to cause interference. The result of over deviation is distortion of the received signal and interference to adjacent channels. So you just get a bunch of mess. You get more of a mess on FM versus AM, which is a bit different. So the other thing, key clicks. So key clicks affect, going back to your CW key. It's not the clicking of the key. It's the clicking that takes place when you are quickly turning on and off your transmitter. So it's introducing key clicks. So if this is the CW signal, right here, this little lobe or shoulder on the peak, or going up to the peak, is your key click. And that's from your transmitter keying on and keying off, keying on and keying off. So that can be handled by, what is it? I use it in CW mode. Full break-in. Yeah. So there's break-in, full break-in. There we go. It's basically where your transmitter will hold TX open for a limited amount of time, which you can set in some cases, while you're doing CW. So if you're slow, you may need it to be longer, or just full break-in to wait. Many HF operators use an amplifier, some called a linear. A lot of people use amplifiers, which you will find. So they can make contacts when conditions are poor, over difficult propagation paths, or in situations such as running a net for which a strong signal is necessary. So you can make plenty of contacts all day on 100 watts. There's no problem with that. But if you really want to be a booming signal and you want to rag chew all night long with your buddies on 80 meters or whatever, then sometimes having an amp can help that. Having an amp sometimes causes difficulty in other areas, like components within the chain sometimes don't like working with amps, or they're limited. Sometimes antennas can't handle amplified power, so you have to buy accordingly based off of what your goals are. So if you want like a 600, 500 watt amp or whatever, you got to make sure you have an antenna that can handle that, and a tuner that may be able to handle that. Or you don't have a tuner at all and your antenna is perfectly matched, right? But you got to then pay or tune your antenna to be that way. On HF, high power amplifiers often use vacuum tube circuits that require operator adjustment. That is a true statement. Amplifiers still use vacuum tubes, so that's interesting. Modes such as CW require linear amplifiers that accurately reproduce the input signal waveform. We've covered that already, but it's a question, so don't forget it. Okay, Class A amplifiers, the most linear, the lowest signal distortion of all class, and also the least efficient, meaning they're going to spend a lot of power. The amplifying device is a Class A amplifier is on all the time. Gain is limited. That is a question. There's a Class B, and then there's a Class AB, and then there's a Class C. Class C amplifying devices are active for less than 1/2 of the signal cycle. This class of amplifier has the highest efficiency, but Class 3 or Class C amplifiers are only suitable for CW and FM because they have poor linearity, meaning 100% on, 100% off. FM don't care, CW don't care. Class C for CW. The efficiency of an amplifier is defined as the RF output power divided by the DC input power. There you go. That is also a question. So let's cover this quickly because it is a question. Transceivers often include a delay in the keying circuit timing so that the changeover relay is completely switched before the transceiver is allowed to supply any RF output. This prevents hot switching, in which the amplifier is already supplying RF at the time the changeover relay is switching. This can destroy the relay or other external devices. There you go. Tuning and driving a linear amp. Input power to the amplifier may also be adjusted during the process. Amplifiers have 3 primary operator adjustments: band, tune, and load, or coupling. No tune or auto tune amplifiers do not require these operator adjustments because of the circuit design or being a microprocessor that adjusts automatically. The band switch configures the input and output impedance, matching the filter circuits for the band on which signals will be applied to the amplifier Tune-in load controls adjust components in the output matching circuit, often called a pi network, that was introduced in Chapter 4. Are people home? That's the dog. No, it's not. I think that's Leia and the family. They're so quiet, though. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to listen for them. I should stop doing that. Let's stay focused. Oh, now my... Sorry about that. Yep, looks like they're home. While the band switch set properly, a small amount of drive power is applied to the amplifier while watching the amplifier's plate. I'm not going to go into the amplifier that much because it's just remember the questions when you get to the practice test. Input power to the amplifier may also be adjusted during the process. Okay. Drive power is important, particularly for grid-driven amplifier circuits in which the input power is applied to the tube's control grid. Similar cautions apply to solid-state amplifiers with power transistors that can be damaged or destroyed by excessive power draw or drive power. Not that I dislike amplifiers, I don't know much about amplifiers, so I'm not going to pretend like I know much about it, and I'm not going to pretend like I can decipher all of that, because honestly, amplifiers are pretty straightforward from my understanding, but I don't want to assume. So anyway, answer the practice questions. I'll leave it at that. Okay, receiver structure. So this is what we were talking about. We've been building on these concepts of components you need: oscillators, modulators, filters. So the wise saying, don't know who said this, but they're quoting it: you can't work them if you can't hear them. That makes the receiver just about the most important part of the ham shack. HF receivers also have more adjustments than HF receivers by far. Why? This section explains how receivers are constructed. Clean out your ears and tune in. It doesn't cover DSP, digital signal processing, and SDR, other than that it exists. Maybe a little bit more in detail later. So most analog receivers in use by amateurs today are some type of super heterodyne, designed in the 20s. As you learned earlier, the mixing together of signals to obtain sum and difference frequencies. How did I close that? The dog just ran in here to get away from the kids. Is called super heterodyne. Super het is built around that process. Receiving signals are incredibly weak, on the order of nano picowatts. Thus, a receiver must be incredibly sensitive to make it possible for an operator to hear such signals. Simultaneously, a single signal must be picked out of a crowded spectrum, where nearby signals might be billions of times stronger, so the receiver must be very selective. So you've got two problems. You got to pick up very weak signals, which means you need to be sensitive, but you also have to be able to slide away from overpowering signals to focus in on those low-powered signals. How do you do both? That's what a super heterodyne does. Okay, let's trace the signals through the receiver antenna. Received signals are first strengthened by the RF amplifier and then applied to the RF input of a mixer. There's your question. The local oscillator is adjusted so the desired signal creates a mixing product at the immediate frequency IF. Okay, so let's flip this over. The simple possible super het consists of a mixer connected to the antenna, an HF oscillator to act as an LO, and a detector that operates directly on the resulting IF signal. Is there an example? There is an example. Okay, so remember how I talk about Robert asks, are the linear amplifiers for use on SDR type setups? I don't know what you mean, because SDR type setups, linear amps are required for AM and single sideband, right? That's what we've been talking about. It doesn't matter if it's an SDR or not. It matters about the mode, the modulation mode. A super het receiver converts signals to audio in 2 steps. The front end converts the frequency of the signal to an intermediate frequency where most of the gain of the receiver is provided. A second mixer, the product detector, converts the signal to audio frequencies. So remember when I always talk about front ends? the front end of the radio gets blown out or washed out, or it's not a very strong front end or whatever. That's what we're talking about here. It receives too high a power, too high RF, and it blows it out, and it just deafens it, and the radio becomes useless. So things like the Yaesu FT60R is a really good front end, right? It's taking the signal, the front end converts the frequency of a signal to the intermediate frequency. Okay, so at this point, a lot of radios like the Baofeng just completely fail. And then it goes in and it's got a product detector where it takes the oscillator and it amplifies it, right? The BFO, which some shortwave radios have BFOs to do single sideband, which is a further step of filtering that you can do. Okay. The RF amplifier and mixer comprise the receiver's front end, which we mentioned. This section of the receivers process weak signals at the original frequencies, so it must work over a wide frequency range and for both strong and weak signals. A tunable filter or a preselector is sometimes used between the antenna and RF amplifier to reject strong out-of-band signals. Not so much in the Baofeng. Man, there's a lot of gas in here. It chokes me up every time I take a sip. All right, question. The audio information is recovered by a discriminator, which is also the detector, or a quadrature detector. Quadrature? Quadrature, sure. That replaces the product detector. The audio is amplified as before. And this one is, once the FM signal is converted to IF, high-gain amplifiers called limiters change the signal to a square wave. It only varies in frequency, not amplitude. A discriminator converts the frequency variations to audio. So, your antenna, RF amp, mixer, oscillator, filter, limiter, then discriminator, and that's where you get your product out of it, along with your AF amp. Okay. So this is a cool box. This is a really good explanation that covers a lot of the filtering that you might do on an HF station. Notch filtering, passband, IF shifts, and reverse sideband. So every receiver uses IF filters to narrow the receiver's passband and remove unwanted signals. An assortment of filters are available to suit the common operating modes and styles. Once an interfering signal is in the receiver's passband, however, removing it can be difficult. You can apply several techniques to get rid of these signals. So, notch filter removes signals in a very narrow band of frequencies, such as a single tone from an interfering carrier. So if you had like a wall wart or something like that, where you were listening within the bandwidth of the signal you were trying to hear, you can notch that out potentially. You may lose some of the product or the sideband of whomever you're trying to listen to or something along those lines, but you can notch out some of those high-pitched tones that are prevalent in noise, because we've got power and crap all around us. Passband IF shifts adjust the receiver's passband above or below the displayed carrier frequency to avoid the signals. This results in a shift in tone of the received signal, but often improves intelligibility. So if I had my other camera, I could show you this, but on the 7300, you can shift them independently of each other, and that allows you to maybe get around an interfering frequency. You do distort what you're trying to receive, but as they say, it's better to be able to receive something intelligibly than not, because of the issues dealing with whatever that loud thing is that's in the way. Reverse sideband controls the operator to switch between receiving CW signals above or below upper or lower sideband. This can help avoid nearby signals causing interference by placing them on the other side of the carrier frequency where the filtering rejects them. So you're if you're doing CW and you're moving along and you've got a carrier and you're on one of the upper or lower sidebands, you can flip them, right? Basically. Take it easy, James. Okay. Here's this little part that talks about DSP. Basically, a DSP is where you have the super heterodyne, which is an analog radio. DSP is basically introducing it's not a computer per se, but it's a microprocessor. It's a microprocessor that performs certain functions in the mix of the block diagram of your receiver. So, how does that work? If the receiver is intended to be used for digital modes, The data may be converted directly. No, we don't want to do that. While DSP technology requires an analog receiver front end to tune in a signal. So you find a signal, and you get that IF signal coming in from the front end. Convert it to the IF frequency and amplify it to a certain levels. Once prepared by the front end, the signal is converted to digital form by an analog to digital converter. In digital form, a specialized microprocessor, DSP, performs filtering and other functions mathematically. The data is then converted back to analog form for the human operator by a digital to analog converter. If the receiver is intended to be used for digital modes, the data may be converted directly to characters instead of an analog form. Okay, they have a block diagram. Yeah, they do, but it doesn't cover a lot. That is a very simple block diagram. So you've got your IF coming in. This goes from analog to digital, okay, into a digital signal processor that's doing the heavy lifting for whatever you're processing, maybe upper or lower pass filters, passband filters. The output of that goes from digital back to audio and then back into the quote-unquote traditional radio. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. DSP is also much more flexible than analog circuitry, limited only by processor speed and available memory. As to how many options, functions, and adjustments can be implemented, DSP functions can even react automatically to the received signals and adjust the function's characteristics. Most common, signal filtering, as I mentioned. The radio with DSP offers selectable program filters and allows the operator to adjust the filter bandwidth and shape and even define new filters. So I have 3 filtering modes that are just right off the main screen of the 7300 that allow you to basically reduce the bandwidth. And it can distort the incoming received signal or the product, but it's often way better to do that than be completely enveloped in the noise, right? Noise reduction. It is possible for DSP to distinguish noise and remove a great deal of it. So that's one of the greatest things, is having a noise blanker on the radio. Helps a lot. It really does drop it down. Again, when we get the third camera, we'll show that off next time. Notch filtering is for removing something that's like a very loud part of the frequency that's not part of the data you're trying to receive, like a wall wart that just keeps putting out this same tone. Noise blanker will take care of that. Okay. And this is where they talk about briefly SDRs. A software-defined radio. In an SDR, all major signal processing functions are performed by the software. The only analog circuits that handle signals are the RF input and output to the radio and the audio for and from the operator or whatever system is connected to the radio. So the 7300 is totally an SDR. KX2, KX3, all SDRs. There's very little analog components other than what brings in the RF, and everything else is handled by the computer, basically, the device that's in the radio. Okay. There are several manufacturers. I don't want to mention that. Where's developed and installed? So the advantage of SDR is that as long as you're working within the performance capable of the radio, you can program and add to change many functions of the radio, and you won't have to replace hardware or add filters or take filters out or do whatever. So they're incredibly flexible from that point of view. They can also be pretty expensive because those components are not cheap. Okay, we are coming up on an hour and a half. So let's get through this page, and we're going to get to HF installation, and we'll stop there. Because that's... Well, how far are we out? Oh my god, we're not that far. Never mind, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Automatic gain control, we've mentioned it. The AGC circuit adjusts the receiver gain by changing the voltage that controls the IF amplifier. This voltage is also read by an S-meter, the receiver of which is used to measure the signal strength. S stands for signal. The more the AGC circuit has to reduce gain to keep volume constant, the higher the reading of the S-meter. Since stronger signals require less gain to produce the same output, you'll notice that turning down the RF gain, which RF gain dial is your volume control basically on HF radios. That is your AGC. Your AGC, if it doesn't have to kick in to help you, then that's a very strong signal. So when you see an S9, that's like no AGC. Anything above that's like very good signal, a very good incoming signal. S-meter changing with a S-meters are calibrated in S units with a change in 1 usually equal to 6 dB. So 1 S unit is 6 dB above the previous S unit. Change in signal strength, although this may vary with manufacturer, an AGC circuit may also respond differently to different signal strengths. Nevertheless, the S-meter is a useful indicator of signal strength. I only care about one thing. Okay, here we go. You'll notice that S9 is at the midpoint of the S-meter display. To the right are additional markings, 20, 40, and 60. These correspond to dB above S9. So a reading of S9 plus 20 corresponds to a signal 20 dB, 100 times stronger than an S9 signal. So there you go. Cool. Steve's leaving. Take it easy, Steve. Take it easy, Curtis, or who's leaving? Anyway, sorry to see you go, guys. I'll catch up with you later. Okay. Receiver linearity. It's important that the receiver respond linearly to receive signals. Just as important for the transmitter to amplify linearly. So AM, single sideband, they are linear. You need to support that, whether it's receive or transmit. So we'll cover the question and we'll move on because I think we've talked about linearity enough. The solution to overload is to either filter out the offending signal or reduce receiver gain using an attenuator. So, as a side note, attenuators are used to reduce incoming signals for when you're doing like a fox hunt and you want to focus your beam to give you a very vertical sliver of directionality. We use attenuators to do that. So an attenuator reduces. Proper use of the attenuator and RF gain control can dramatically reduce received noise and distortion caused by strong signals. So you're going to try and reduce incoming signals so that you can avoid the garbage that other radios are throwing out. Okay. We can cover this pretty quickly. HF installation. So HF installation and mobile radio installation are pretty similar. There's a lot of things in common. So we just went from smallest components of oscillators and modulators, put them together to create different types of transmitters and receivers that are capable of receiving AM and FM signals. And we talked briefly about DSPs and software-defined radios. Now, you've got this box, and you've got an amplifier per se, and an antenna. How do we put it together for use in a car or use in your home? Okay, so mobile installations is the first thing. I don't know why they mentioned this, but I did not know this. Once quite popular, mobile HF operation took a back seat, so to speak, during the 80s and 90s as hams turned to VHF, UHF on the road, and HF at home. So basically what that's saying is, once upon a time, everybody used to drive around with HF radios in their car, which I don't know that I believe that. I mean, unless they're talking about 11 meter, because CB is technically 11 meter, and that's kind of HF. I wonder if that's what they mean, and they're just trying not to say CB, maybe. Over the past decade, however, the introduction of compact all-band, all-mode radios and new generation of mobile antennas have accelerated HF mobile operation growth. Because, again, the antennas are big. They require a lot of wire to be resonant on 80 meters, 40 meters, and even 20 meters. So mobile installations of cars usually kind of top out at 20 meters, and it usually means it's a vertical element with some kind of loading coil that you adjust and short the loading coil to make it resonant on whatever frequency you want it to be. Some are manual and some are automatic. The automatic ones are really nice, but they don't do that great. They're mobile. They're super compromised antenna. Okay. So the important thing with mobile installations, cars, is that you use small gauge wires as small as possible. And by small gauge, we mean like 10 gauge wire, and that you go directly to the battery. The problem with mobile installations cars is that you have all kinds of stuff around you and you're driving kind of in a Faraday cage, and the components aren't grounded well because it might not be a unibody construction. There's just all kinds of things that cause problems. So what's generally recommended is that you go through your firewall and you connect directly to the battery, and you connect directly to a really good frame ground. The battery kind of helps to filter the incoming power, the DC, and hopefully you avoid the alternator, which can add harmonics into the radio. Robert Lackey, I'm going to tie Josh a Yagi UDA fly for his hat. And I never take it easy, Robert. I hope you mean like a fly fishing fly. That'd be cool. Yeah, let me know when that one's ready. All right. Okay, so we mentioned power connections. Do not use a cigarette lighter, as the circuit is usually rated for only a few amps, which is insufficient to supply a 100-watt HF radio. Yeah, HF in a car can be difficult. So also make sure you're actually running the vehicle, unless you have a big enough batteries to support that. Do not assume the metal chassis is a suitable DC ground, because it's probably not. Antenna connections. So we talked about antenna connections on the mobile live stream video. That's unrelated to any of the license. The best possible location to mount an antenna is directly in the middle of the roof of a sedan, or an SUV, directly in the middle of that, the highest point, kind of. Just keep that in mind. Okay, the most significant limitation of mobile operation is that the antenna system must be smaller in terms of wavelength than a home station. This is particularly true on lower frequencies such as 75 meters, a popular mobile band. I did not know 75 meters was a popular band. When mobiling, the entire vehicle becomes part of the antenna system, and attention to every detail can pay big benefits in signal strength. For example, use the most efficient antenna you can, sure. Make sure RF ground connections to the vehicle are solid, sure. Mount the antenna where it is as clear as possible of metal surfaces. So, like a side mount on the side of like a Jeep, not great, because you are getting all kinds of funkiness from the metal that's around it. That's why highest up, highest point is usually the best. All right. Tame that high-pitched whine. That's from the alternator. Make sure you use the battery as a filter. Just go through the firewall, connect directly. Don't put the radio in the engine bay, but connect the power through there. Use fuse connectors. Most of the radios today mobile radios have a really long wire that you can go through the firewall with. Use a fuse connector. That's important. Common sources of interfering signals include the vehicle's onboard control computers, electric motor-driven devices such as fuel pumps and windows, and battery charging systems. Okay. Online mobile resources and manufacturer service bulletins can help you deal with mobile interference and noise problems. I've never had to deal with that, maybe because it's VHF, UHF. This is talking primarily about HF, so your mileage will vary. I don't have much to say about that, other than if you've got a computer in the car that puts out interference, I don't know what you do about that. Get another car, I guess. Oh, man, that's really bitey. Anyway, RF grounding and ground loops. Okay, so if you're a member of the Ham Radio Crash Course, I posted a link about shack grounding. So did Tom. Tom and I have differing opinions on some grounding stuff, but in general, grounding's fine. I don't think it plays as big a factor as some people believe, but I will talk about what absolutely does affect grounding and will affect your computer and your home station. Ground loops. So this is the way a ground's supposed to look. This is a strap, a bonding bus, like a half-inch copper pipe. It doesn't have to be a flat bar like some computer labs will have, or some engineering labs. And you are going to use strap, wire, something like that, and you're going to bond all of the electric equipment, computer, transceiver, keyer, tuner, antenna switch, everything that goes into the radio or touches anything on the radio. And you're going to trying to get in. You're going to connect that pipe via some kind of ground strap or another wire, something like 10 gauge wire, to a ground rod. Trying to get in the door right now. Edison, go eat. I'll come out in a second. So we're doing this again. We're doing this again, I see. Oh, good, he's gone. Okay. So you need to do that so that you don't create separate ground cycles, because one ground loop. So do I have a picture? Is there a picture of a ground loop? There isn't. I may have to draw one. So if this computer and this transceiver had the keyer and the antenna switch on a different rod, like if there was a break here and there was a wire that went to the same ground rod, you've created a loop between these two separate ground systems. They are single loop transformers, basically. Is that right? Single loop transformers, or what are we calling it? The goal. It is important to note at HF and higher frequencies, AC safety ground wire usually acts more like an antenna than a ground. So they're almost resonant in their own right. Is necessary. Enclosures, the goal of RF bonding. Nice audio source. I want to explain why, though. Where is the actual... if the ground connection reports a resonant... If your station includes an external ground rod for lighting, make sure the connections are as short as possible. If ground connection approaches resonance and high impedance... Well, anyway, you're basically creating a loop. Oh, there it is. I saw it. This loop acts as a single turn inductor that picks up voltages from magnetic fields generating by power transformers, AC wiring, and other low frequency currents that results in a hum or buzz in audio signals or an AC signal that interferes with control or data signals. Ground loops can be avoided by using RF bonding bus to which all pieces of equipment are connected. So you have to connect them all together in one line that goes to the ground. Don't have a separate ground bar where you have different equipment in the same room connected differently. Connect them all the same. Easy. There you go. David, the meme lord, says MFJ sells a 75-meter mobile whip antenna. It's only 7 feet long. It's pretty good. Use it. Try it out. Patrick says, I had always heard the signal would radiate in a circle if you put it in the center, and it would be strongest across the body of the car if it wasn't. I don't know. It will depend on the makeup of the car. Yeah, back in the day, co-phase side mount antennas were popular on 10 meter as it was on CB, which is affectionately known as 11 meters. Okay. Got that. Remember, okay, RF interference. There's a lot of stuff on RF interference. RF interference is very difficult in the ham shack. I'll give you a piece of advice. If you're getting interference from somewhere, the best thing you can do is turn off all your breakers in the house and run your radio off of a battery. If you still have the interference, then it's outside of your house. If it's inside your house, then the best thing you can do is find a radio or something that can receive closely on that frequency, whether it's a shortwave radio or something like that. Tune it to that frequency using your HF to figure where it out is. Then walk around and find out what's producing the interference. It's the best way I know how to do it. Remember to match the low-pass filter impedance with the characteristic impedance of the feed line into which it's inserted. Okay, harmonics. Somebody mentioned harmonics. They yelled out with an exclamation point. Spurious emissions from an amateur station may be received by radio or TV equipment. The solution is to use a low-pass filter to remove the spurious emissions at the amateur station. Remember to match the low-pass filter's impedance with the characteristic impedance of the feed line into which it's inserted. That is a straight-up remember it question. Just remember it. And that pretty much takes us through all of Chapter 5. We did it in under 2 hours. That's pretty good. Arcing, don't make this happen. Any spark or sustained arc creates radio noise over a wide range of frequencies and will interfere with both amateur and consumer reception. Yeah, no crap. When created by the AC power lines, the result can be cracking or buzzing. Like if you ever lived by the ocean or something with a really high humidity, you can sometimes hear the transformers like that kind of thing, that buzz. You'll pick that buzz up in the radio. Okay. Common RFI symptoms. CWR data, the interference will consist of on and off buzzes, humming, clicks, or thumps corresponding to the pattern of the signal. I get this occasionally because I haven't properly bonded my station. Yes, I said it. I need to do that. Single sideband voice, similar to AF phone, but the voice will appear distorted or garbled. RFI symbols. That's not what I mean. Symptoms. Okay. In suppression. Okay, so some ways to suppress RFI. Ferrite beads and cores can also be placed on cables to prevent RF common mode current from flowing onto the outside of cable braids or shields. So you ever see the power bricks that have spark gap transmitters? If anybody's using a spark gap, I'm sure the cops on the FCC are going to come find you. The ferrite beads clamp around power cords, and the idea is that it disperses RF that's trying to get onto the shielding, the mesh shielding of the power cord or whatever cord. So using ferrite beads judicially in your shack is usually a good idea. You should do that. Okay, there you go. Edison's losing it, so I got to go right now. Interference to audio equipment and appliances such appliance switch and sensor connections can sometimes be eliminated by placing a small bypass capacitor across balance connections or from each connection to chassis ground. Okay. Next chapter, digital modes, which is exactly where we want to be because I know this stuff pretty well. So hopefully that was interesting. I do have one more shout out before I go, and I'm going to have to do a standalone video on it because it's a part of my field day kit, but I got to go because the kid's losing his mind. Dakota batteries, if you're in the market for a 10 amp 12 volt battery, if you're thinking about doing a lead acid battery or looking at bio-NO or anything like that, check out the Dakota batteries. Google them, dakotalithiumbattery.com. You can use Hashnasi as a coupon code, and I think it's $5 off, or tell me if you go check it out. Tell me what it is. I think it's $5 off, or it's 5% or something like that. Anyway, just for those of you that are thinking about getting ready for field day, I'll take a couple of quick questions and then I gotta go. How close can the antennas be on a Crown Vic police interceptor? USC SIG is center roof, striker A10 on trunk. I don't know. The reality is I don't know. I'm not a CB guy. I have an understanding that they are far enough away in frequency that you shouldn't have a problem, but I don't know. The weight, we talked about this on the last stream with Jerry. I don't have the weight on me. If you want, go to the last stream. It's at least 2 pounds. 2 pounds of weight. 2 pounds about. 2 pounds. Yeah. DJ Schnib says, thanks for the vid. I don't know how your wife deals with these trims. She usually takes the kids on a play date with other friends of Ben's. That's usually how we handle it, or they go out. And I believe they went out to dinner tonight. So they have a bit of fun, but Edison is a handful. He is definitely a handful baby. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I need about a couple minutes to get sorted. I'm going to head over to Discord for a little bit, and then I'm going to call it an evening. Okay, guys, I appreciate it. Give me the thumbs up if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button and the bell. And I've got a bunch of videos coming up. I've got a review that'll be coming out here soon. And then we're going to start talking about field day. So lots of stuff to talk about on field day. Working in the field. Not like SOTA, right? So actually take your 100-watt radio outside and work in a prolonged environment, right? Think about an emergency scenario where you'd have to do that. That's what field day is about. Field day is about taking your 100-watt radio, getting as close to that power as possible, possibly using solar and generators to power it, and then go for as long as you can. So we're going to try and work on that. All right. Patrick Dickey, I asked at our local shop. What I was told is that 18 inches between the CB antenna and 2 meters 17 will be if you're running 2 CB antennas. I was told 3 feet. Is this so? You're obviously not going to transmit both of them at the same time, so you should be fine. Although one may blank out the other. I'm not positive though. I have a feeling they won't interfere with each other. And yeah, you need to give them enough space. 18 inches at least seems fine between the 2 meter and the CB. Okay, take it easy, guys. I will talk to you later.